Soaked by the rain, a young delivery boy accidentally walks into a meeting where a tech empire is collapsing due to a mistranslation. Armed with an old USB drive and the legacy of his unrecognized father, he fixes an error that even the top experts couldn't decode. But his greatest victory isn't saving the deal. It's translating the truth the world had long forgotten. The rain lashed down on London that March afternoon. The grey sky seemed to collapse over Oxford Street, turning the thoroughfares into small rivers and pedestrians into hurried figures under umbrellas. Thomas Sanders, 23, pedalled with difficulty, balancing on his drenched bicycle while protecting his delivery backpack as best he could. The delivery app had been his livelihood since he dropped out of his languages and literature degree the previous year. The only son of Anthony Sanders, a respected Mandarin translator who had passed away 3 years prior, Thomas carried the weight of an unfulfilled promise to his father to complete his studies. But life had other plans. After Anthony was gone, bills accumulated, and academic education became a luxury he could no longer afford. The destination of his last delivery was an imposing corporate building in the city's financial heart. Tech Global, one of the country's largest technology companies, occupied the top 10 floors of that glass and steel skyscraper. Thomas left his bicycle at the entrance and walked through the lobby, dripping water all the way. "Delivery for room 4208, he said to the security guard, who looked at him with disdain, noting his wet clothes and tired appearance. 18th floor. Corridor to the right, the man replied dryly. The elevator ascended quickly as Thomas tried unsuccessfully to compose himself. His reflection in the mirror revealed a thin young man with curly hair and deep brown eyes, an inheritance from his mother, a history teacher who had met his father during a work trip. Upon reaching the indicated floor, Thomas realized something was wrong. The corridor buzzed with hurried executives, talking loudly on their phones, typing frantically on tablets. He followed the directions to room 4208, but the door was open, and a chaotic meeting was in progress inside. A huge screen displayed documents with Mandarin characters, and next to them, English translations that seemed to be causing great agitation. "Excuse me," Thomas tried to say. "I have a delivery for—" No one paid attention. The men and women in suits seemed absorbed in a crisis unfolding before their eyes. "We're about to lose the £3 billion contract because of a botched translation," shouted a middle-aged man banging on the table. "How did no one check this before sending it?" "The automatic translation system was updated last week, Mr. Miller," replied a woman in glasses, visibly nervous. "All tests indicated 99% efficiency." "Well, it seems we found the 1% error, and it's going to cost half the company's market value," responded the man, whom Thomas identified as Richard Miller, Tech Global's CEO, frequently mentioned in corporate world reports. Thomas stood at the door, holding the package, unable to interrupt the discussion. His eyes, however, fixed on the screen. Years of accompanying his father's work at home had given him familiarity with Mandarin. He wasn't fluent, but he knew enough to notice the glaring problem in the translation. "The system confused traditional Mandarin with simplified," he said almost to himself. A woman standing near the door heard him. "What did you say?" she asked, frowning. Silence fell over the room as all faces turned to the young man soaked by the rain. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" asked Richard Miller, annoyed by the interruption. "I'm a delivery driver. I came to bring this," Thomas replied, showing the package. "But I noticed the translation error is basic. The system is interpreting traditional Mandarin characters as if they were simplified, and vice versa." The room remained silent, incredulous stares fixed on the wet young man who dared to comment on something so technical. Richard Miller approached, his eyes narrowed, evaluating Thomas from head to toe. "And how does a delivery driver know that?" he asked, suspicious. "My father was a Mandarin translator," Thomas replied, feeling a lump in his throat. "I learned by observing his work." The woman in glasses, who introduced herself as Dr. Caroline Fisher, head of the Computational Linguistics Department, approached the screen. That would explain the Chinese reaction. "If we're mixing writing systems, we could be saying something completely different from what we intend. You only have an hour before the decisive video conference with the executives of the Chinese company," another person in the room said. "If we don't fix this now, the deal is dead." Thomas stepped forward, drawn by years of living with documents and translations at home. "I can help," he offered, surprising himself with his audacity. "For £500 I can correct the document in less than an hour." A murmur of laughter swept through the room. Richard Miller smiled disdainfully. £500? We're talking about a £3 billion contract. Do you really think we'd entrust this to a food delivery driver? Thomas swallowed hard but did not back down. "Do you have a better traditional Mandarin expert available?" The silence that followed was his answer. Dr. Fisher, however, seemed to consider the possibility. "Richard, we're out of options. Our translators are all at the workshop in Manchester, and the Chinese team is demanding a response in an hour." Richard looked at his watch, then at the document on the screen, and finally at Thomas. Reluctantly, he gestured to the team. "Give him a room, a computer, and the file. We have 50 minutes. Thomas was led to a small meeting room. Before leaving, he heard Richard whisper to Caroline, "If he fails, the responsibility is yours." Alone in front of the computer, Thomas opened the document. It was a complex contract for the supply of artificial intelligence components. The Chinese company, Huawei Tech, was an industry giant and planned to use British algorithms in its systems. As he examined the text, memories of his father working at home flooded his mind. Anthony always said that translating was not just transposing words, but building bridges between cultures. He recalled the nights his father patiently explained the different cultural contexts of Mandarin expressions. Thomas took a small, worn USB drive from his backpack. It was his father's flash drive, which he carried with him like an amulet. It contained glossaries, specialized dictionaries, and translation notes that Anthony had compiled over decades of work. "Let's see what you taught me, Dad," he whispered, connecting the device to the computer. The minutes passed quickly as Thomas identified and corrected the errors. The main problem was in a crucial paragraph about intellectual property, where the word partnership had been translated as subordination, an error that would certainly infuriate any Chinese businessman. As he worked, Thomas noticed something familiar in the style of the original document. The structure, the choice of words, everything reminded him of his father's work. It was as if he recognized Anthony's linguistic handwriting in the subtext of that contract. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear. As the minutes dwindled, Thomas delved deeper and deeper into the document. The feeling of familiarity with the text was no coincidence. Accessing old files on his father's USB drive, he found fragments almost identical to those in the current contract. His heart pounded with the discovery. This was not just any contract, but a direct evolution of the work Anthony Sanders had done years earlier. Comparing the dates on the files, Thomas realized that his father had created the base model of that very agreement 5 years ago, when he worked as a freelance consultant for Tech Global. The company had simply updated and expanded the original document, without ever crediting Anthony for its fundamental structure. "So that's it," he murmured to himself, recalling the nights he had seen his father working tirelessly on that project, only to be dismissed weeks later without recognition. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Caroline Fisher entered the room, her face tense. "How are we doing?" "We only have 20 minutes before the video conference." Thomas took a deep breath, trying to control the mixture of emotions swirling within him. "I found the central problem," he said, keeping his voice steady. The automatic translation system confused cultural contexts, not just linguistic ones. In Mandarin, nuances of hierarchy and respect are fundamental. The software translated terms of mutual cooperation as subordination, making it seem like Tech Global is demanding Huawei submit to its conditions. Caroline approached, adjusting her glasses to examine the screen. "That would explain why they accused us of cultural arrogance," she commented, impressed by Thomas's analysis. "Can you fix it in time?" "I'm almost done," he replied, pointing to the document. "I'm rewriting the problematic paragraphs and re-establishing the balance of mutual respect in the language." The scientist looked curiously at the USB drive connected to the computer. "What is that you're using?" Thomas hesitated for a moment before answering. "My father's reference materials. He was an expert in cultural translation, not just linguistic." Caroline nodded, asking no further questions, and left the room to inform the team about the progress. Alone again, Thomas continued his work, each correction representing a small reparation to his father's memory. In the final minutes before the deadline, he made a final review. The document now accurately reflected the original intention, a technological partnership based on mutual respect and egalitarian collaboration. Cultural nuances were aligned, and appropriate formality had been restored. With a sigh of relief, Thomas saved the file and sent it to the email Caroline had provided. When he finished, the door opened and Richard Miller entered, followed by his executive team. "Finished?" the CEO asked without hiding his skepticism. "Yes," Thomas replied. "The main problem was in the translation of the value proposition. Where it should have said mutually beneficial cooperation, the system translated it as submission to our conditions. In Mandarin, this is considered extremely offensive, especially in negotiations between large companies." Richard looked at his watch. "We have 5 minutes to send the corrected document before the video conference." "If this doesn't work, it will work," Thomas interrupted, with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. The document was hastily sent to the communications team, who immediately forwarded it to the Chinese executives. Room 4208 was quickly rearranged for the decisive video conference. Thomas, who should have left after completing his work, was discreetly led to a corner where he could observe without being noticed. The enormous screen lit up, revealing the solemn face of Wei Zhong, CEO of Huawei Tech, accompanied by his executive team. The official interpreter began the formal introductions, and Thomas held his breath as he watched the Chinese reaction to receiving the revised document. After a few minutes of tense silence, as the Chinese team examined the material, Wei Zhong spoke something in Mandarin. The interpreter translated. "Mr. Wei says that the current document demonstrates the respect and cultural understanding they expected from the beginning. He appreciates Tech Global's effort in correcting the previous misunderstandings." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Richard Miller smiled, instantly regaining his confident posture. "Please convey to Mr. Wei that we deeply value this partnership and that mutual respect is the foundation of our commercial relationship," he replied, suddenly transformed into an eloquent diplomat. The video conference proceeded with renewed cordiality. Final details were settled, deadlines established, and at the end of 40 minutes the £3 billion contract was saved. When the call ended, the room erupted in celebrations. Executives who minutes earlier seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown now exchanged backpats and relieved smiles. Richard Miller raised his hand, asking for silence. "I want to congratulate everyone on managing this crisis," he began, without mentioning Thomas. "Our team's ability to reverse adverse situations shows why we are market leaders." Dr. Fisher cleared her throat, bothered by the omission. "Actually, Richard, we should thank the young man who identified and corrected the problem," she said, pointing to the corner where Thomas was discreetly observing. "Without him, we'd be explaining to shareholders how we lost our largest international client." All eyes turned to Thomas, who remained silent, embarrassed by the sudden attention. Richard seemed annoyed but nodded mechanically. "Yes, of course. Impressive work, Mr. Sanders." "Thomas Sanders," the young man replied. A flicker of recognition crossed Richard's face, so fleeting that only Thomas noticed it. "Well, Mr. Sanders, it seems we owe you £500, the CEO said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He took his wallet from his pocket and counted the money. "Actually, let's make it 1,000. A bonus for excellent work." Thomas accepted the money without showing emotion, though inside he felt a mixture of indignation and determination growing. It wasn't about the amount. It was about what that moment represented. "Where did you learn Mandarin with such proficiency?" Richard asked, studying him intently. "From my father, Anthony Sanders," Thomas replied, carefully observing the executive's reaction. "He worked as a freelance translator for several companies, including Tech Global a few years ago." The name seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. The CEO maintained his composure, but his eyes revealed a flash of recognition and perhaps guilt. "Sanders. Yes, I think I remember." "An excellent professional," he said mechanically. "He was more than excellent," Thomas corrected, his voice now firm. "He created the base model of this very contract 5 years ago." He was never credited for the work, nor properly compensated. The fundamental structure I saved today was originally developed by him. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The executives exchanged confused glances, while Richard Miller hardened his expression. "That's a very serious accusation." "Young man," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "It's not an accusation. It's a fact," Thomas replied, removing the USB drive from the computer. "I have all the original files here, with date stamps and metadata that prove it. My father spent nights developing a translation system that respected both the linguistic and cultural aspects of Mandarin. A system that apparently Tech Global abandoned in favor of an inferior automated solution." Dr. Fisher looked from Richard to Thomas, beginning to understand the implications of what was being said. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard Miller dismissed his executives with a brief gesture, remaining only with Dr. Fisher and Thomas. The rain continued to fall heavily outside, creating a curtain of water on the panoramic windows that reflected the atmosphere inside the office. "Let's talk privately," Richard said, indicating his personal office at the end of the corridor. The three walked in silence. The CEO's office was a spacious area, decorated with minimalist elegance, award-winning photographs on the walls, and a privileged view of Oxford Street. Richard closed the door and motioned for them to sit on the sofa set near the window. "Thomas, right?" He began now in a calculatedly cordial tone. "First, I want to thank you again. What you did today saved not only a contract, but possibly hundreds of jobs that depended on this agreement." Thomas merely nodded, remaining silent. The water from his damp clothes began to stain the Italian leather sofa. "About your father, Anthony," Richard continued. "I remember him, yes. A talented man. Unfortunately, our paths diverged due to differences in vision." "You mean after you absorbed his work without recognition?" Thomas interrupted, unable to contain the bitterness in his voice. Richard exchanged a look with Caroline, who seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. "Richard, I wasn't in the linguistic department at the time, but if what the young man says is true, we need to verify it," she said. "It's not necessary to verify what I already know," Richard replied firmly. He turned back to Thomas. "Your father was hired as a freelancer. All work produced during that period legally belongs to Tech Global, as per contract. There was no misappropriation." "Legality is not synonymous with ethics," Thomas retorted. "My father spent years perfecting his cultural translation methodology. When he presented the system to Tech Global, you dismissed him and implemented a simplified version of his method without any credit. The system that failed today was a cheap attempt to automate what my father did with real human knowledge." Caroline seemed intrigued. "The system we use was developed internally by the AI team, based on my father's work," Thomas completed. "The same structures, the same principles of cultural equivalence, but without the deep understanding that underpinned the original method." Richard stood up, walking to the window. The city below was partially obscured by the rain, distorted lights reflecting in the puddles. "What do you want, Thomas?" he finally asked, turning to face the young man. "Money? Late recognition for your father? Revenge?" Thomas felt the USB drive in his pocket. There lay not only the proof of Anthony's work, but also his dreams, his theories, his worldview through words. It's a legacy that went far beyond corporate contracts. "I want justice," he replied simply. "I didn't come here today planning this. I was just doing my job as a delivery driver. But seeing that the system failed exactly where my father's method would have worked, I couldn't stay silent." Caroline looked at the young man with growing respect. There was something in Thomas's posture, in the way his eyes revealed both vulnerability and determination, that impressed her. "Richard," she said, "we need to consider this seriously. Our translation system obviously has fundamental flaws that almost cost us billions today. If this man's original method was superior—" Richard raised his hand, interrupting her. "I am considering it, Caroline." He turned to Thomas. "I have a proposal for you." Thomas waited, suspicious. "Tech Global is always looking for talent. You demonstrated today not only technical knowledge, but intuition and ability under pressure. I am willing to offer you a position in our localization and cultural translation team. Starting salary of £15,000, full benefits, possibility of rapid growth. The offer hung in the air like smoke. £15,000 a month was more than Thomas earned in half a year as a delivery driver. It was the financial stability he hadn't had since his father's passing, the chance to go back to university, to have a comfortable life. "And what about my father's work?" he asked. Richard made a vague gesture with his hand. "We can create internal recognition, perhaps name some methodology in his honor." "That's not enough," Thomas said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "My father spent sleepless nights developing that system. He believed he was creating something that would change how British companies communicated with the world. What he deserves is public recognition as the creator of the methodology that Tech Global still uses today." Richard's gaze hardened. "That's impossible. It would imply admitting that our current system is derivative, which could have legal repercussions and damage the company's image." "That's precisely why it's necessary," Thomas insisted. "It's not just about my father. How many other collaborators have had their contributions erased? How many other talented people were discarded after the company extracted what it needed from them?" Caroline stood up, placing herself beside Thomas. "Richard, he's right. Our corporate culture needs to change. Cases like this are exactly what led us to today's crisis, ignoring the human element in favor of superficial efficiency." The CEO looked at both of them, a vein throbbing in his temple. "You don't understand the implications of what you're suggesting," he said. "A company of this size cannot simply admit." He was interrupted by his cell phone ringing. Richard answered quickly, his face changing from irritation to disbelief in seconds. "What do you mean it's on Twitter? Who recorded it?" he asked, alarmed. He looked at the office door, then at Thomas. "Understood. No, don't do anything yet. I'll handle it personally." He hung up the phone and stared at Thomas. "It seems our little crisis and your heroic intervention were recorded by someone on the team. The video is already circulating on social media, along with rumors about your father's story." Thomas's eyes widened, genuinely surprised. He hadn't planned any of this. "I had nothing to do with it," he said. "I believe you," Richard replied, running a hand through his grey hair. "But the damage is done. The company's shares have already fallen 3% in the last 15 minutes, and the hashtag Time Justice for Anthony Sanders is starting to gain traction." Caroline quickly checked her tablet. "Confirmed." The video shows everything from the moment Thomas identified the error to his revelation about his father's work. It already has over 20,000 views. Richard sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking aged. "This is a public relations nightmare," he murmured. Thomas watched the scene with a strange mix of emotions. He didn't want to harm the company or the people who worked there. At the same time, he felt that a cycle of injustice was finally being broken. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice softer now, "we can still turn this into something positive. Tech Global can recognize my father's work, correctly implement his methodology, and position itself as a company that values human contribution as much as technology." Caroline nodded enthusiastically. "He's right, Richard. This can be an opportunity, not a crisis. We demonstrated today that we recognize errors and correct them. We can extend that to our history." Richard looked out the window, contemplating the storm that was now beginning to subside. Raindrops ran down the glass like silent tears. "You look like him," he finally said without looking at Thomas. "Your father. The same stubbornness, the same conviction." Thomas waited, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. "Anthony and I were friends, you know," Richard continued, his voice now distant as if speaking of another life. "At university we studied together, me business administration, him languages and literature. We shared dreams, plans. When I founded Tech Global, he was one of the first people I invited." Thomas frowned, confused. His father had never mentioned this connection. "What happened then?" he asked. Richard finally turned, his eyes revealing something Thomas hadn't expected to see: regret. "We disagreed on the company's direction. Anthony believed in sustainable growth, in valuing every contribution. I wanted rapid expansion, immediate results. When he presented his cultural translation system, I saw the commercial potential, but not in the way he imagined it." "Your father wanted the system to be a collaborative project," Richard continued, his voice laden with memories. He advocated for translators from different cultures to work together, contributing their unique perspectives. I saw it as a slow, expensive, difficult-to-scale process. Thomas absorbed every word, discovering a facet of his father he had never fully known, the business visionary, not just the dedicated language scholar. "So you simplified his method and automated it," Thomas concluded. "Yes," Richard admitted. "I convinced the board that we could create an algorithm that captured the essence of the method without the need for so many human experts." Anthony vehemently opposed it. He said we were losing precisely what made his system special, the human element, the cultural understanding that no machine could replicate. "And he was right," Caroline interjected. "What we saw today proves it. Our AI failed precisely because it didn't understand nuances that any competent human translator would grasp." Richard nodded slowly. "When we decided to go with the automated version, Anthony refused to participate. I offered him a consultant position, a prestigious role, but he refused. He said he wouldn't lend his name to something that betrayed the essence of his work." "That sounds like my father," Thomas commented, a sad smile appearing on his lips. "He left the company and continued working as a freelancer, mainly for academic institutions and NGOs," Richard continued. "Our paths rarely crossed after that. When I heard of his passing years later, I felt," he hesitated, searching for the right word, "remorse. I lost not only a brilliant colleague, but a friend who had a genuine vision." A contemplative silence filled the room. Outside, the storm finally subsided, giving way to a light drizzle. The sky began to clear on the horizon, golden rays of sun penetrating through the dispersing clouds. Caroline, who had been checking her tablet, looked up with an alarmed expression. "Richard, the video has already surpassed 100,000 views. Journalists are calling press relations demanding a statement. We need a decision now." The CEO looked at Thomas, assessing the young man who hours earlier was just an anonymous delivery driver and now represented both a threat and a possible redemption for his company. "What do you suggest we do?" Richard asked, his voice revealing that the question was sincere. Thomas reflected for a moment. He hadn't planned to go this far, but now that he was there, he felt the weight of responsibility, not just for his father's legacy, but for the impact his next words could have on the lives of hundreds of Tech Global employees. "The truth," he finally replied. "Publicly recognize my father's contribution. Correctly implement his method, with the human element he always defended. Transform this crisis into an opportunity to show that Tech Global values responsible innovation and respect for individual contribution." Richard exchanged glances with Caroline, who nodded in approval. "And what about you?" the CEO asked. "My job offer still stands." Thomas shook his head. "I can't accept a position now. It would be like saying all this was for personal gain. This moment isn't about me. It's about recognizing my father's work and the principle he defended." Richard studied the young man for a long moment before nodding. "As stubborn as Anthony," he commented with a slight smile. "Very well. Caroline, schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. We'll make the official announcement." "What about the board of directors?" she asked, concerned. "Leave them to me," Richard replied, a new determination in his voice. "It's time we corrected some courses in this company." The conference room of the Renaissance Hotel in central London was packed with journalists the next morning. Television cameras lined the back, while reporters from various outlets occupied every available seat. The buzz ceased when Richard Miller took the stage, accompanied by Caroline Fisher and other Tech Global executives. Thomas observed everything discreetly from the back of the room. He had slept little, mentally reviewing the events of the previous day, still trying to process how his life had changed so drastically in a matter of hours. He wore the same clothes from the day before. He didn't own formal attire for the occasion. Richard adjusted the microphone and faced the audience of journalists with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with the press. "Good morning, everyone. I appreciate your presence at this extraordinary event. Tech Global has always prided itself on its capacity for innovation and adaptation. Today I come to speak about something equally important, our ability to recognize errors and correct them." An attentive silence fell over the room. "Yesterday, Our company faced a significant crisis involving our automated translation system for Mandarin, an error that almost cost us a £1 billion contract with our Chinese partners. This incident exposed a failure not only technological, but ethical in our structure. Cameras flashed, capturing the CEO's solemn expression. 5 years ago, Tech Global implemented a translation system based on the pioneering work of linguist Anthony Sanders. Richard paused, his gaze briefly meeting Thomas's at the back of the room. Anthony developed a revolutionary methodology that integrated deep cultural understanding into the translation process. His method valued the human element, the contextual sensitivity that no algorithm can fully replicate. Journalists scribbled furiously, while others recorded every word. In our pursuit of efficiency and scalability, we chose to automate and simplify his system, gradually removing the human component that was central to his vision. The result, as demonstrated yesterday, was a flawed system that failed precisely where human understanding was most needed. Richard took a deep breath before continuing. Today, Tech Global officially recognizes Anthony Sanders as the creator of the integrated cultural translation methodology that underpins our systems. More than that, we announced the creation of the Anthony Sanders Institute for Intercultural Linguistic Studies, which will be funded by the company and will have autonomy to develop research in the field. A murmur of surprise swept through the room. Thomas felt a lump in his throat, moved by the unexpected announcement. Furthermore, Richard continued, we are completely overhauling our translation system, returning to Anthony's original vision, a collaboration between advanced technology and genuine human expertise, valuing translators and cultural specialists as essential components of the process. Journalists began raising their hands, eager for questions. Richard pointed to a reporter in the front row. Mr. Miller, is this decision related to the viral video showing a young delivery driver saving the contract with the Chinese company yesterday? Richard smiled slightly. It has everything to do with it. That young man is Thomas Sanders, Anthony's son. It was he who identified the error in our system and corrected it using the knowledge he inherited from his father. His intervention not only saved the contract, but forced us to confront a historical injustice in our organization. Another reporter stood up. Is Mr. Sanders present today? Could he comment on this situation? All eyes turned to the back of the room, where Thomas stood, embarrassed by the sudden attention. Richard gestured, inviting him to the stage. With hesitant steps, Thomas walked down the central aisle. He was uncomfortable with the stares and flashes, but there was a determination in his stride that did not go unnoticed. As he ascended the stage, Richard extended his hand, which Thomas shook formally. Thomas adjusted the microphone, his eyes scanning the attentive audience of journalists. He had never imagined being in such a position, he who just 2 days ago was cycling in the rain delivering meals. Life had these moments of unexpected turning points, reflections his father used to call translations of destiny. Good morning, he began, his voice initially hesitant, but gaining firmness with each word. My name is Thomas Sanders. Yesterday I was just a delivery driver who accidentally walked into a corporate meeting. Today I'm here speaking about the legacy of my father, Anthony Sanders. He paused briefly, organizing his thoughts. My father always said that to translate is not just to transpose words from one language to another, but to build bridges between cultures, between people. He believed that true communication requires both technical knowledge and human sensitivity. A respectful silence filled the room. The recognition announced today by Tech Global is not just a personal or family victory. It is the affirmation of a principle that even in an increasingly automated world, the human element, with its intuition, its empathy, its understanding of cultural nuances remains irreplaceable. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Sanders, will you accept a position at Tech Global or at the institute that will bear your father's name? Thomas exchanged a brief glance with Richard before answering. I have no immediate plans to join the company. My goal was never to gain personal advantage from this situation. What matters most to me is that my father's work is finally recognized and implemented according to his original vision. Another journalist spoke up. What will you do now? Will you continue as a delivery driver? A slight smile appeared on Thomas's lips. I'm still processing everything that has happened, but I hope to resume my studies in languages and literature, with a focus on translation. Perhaps someday I can contribute to the institute that will bear my father's name." After a few additional questions, the press conference concluded. Richard led Thomas to a private room backstage where they could talk away from the press buzz. Caroline accompanied them, along with a young woman Thomas didn't recognize, a woman approximately his age, with curly hair tied in a bun and sharp eyes behind colorful framed glasses. "Thomas, this is Felicity Oliver," Caroline introduced. "She leads our small human translation team, what remained of your father's original vision in the company." Felicity extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's an honor to meet you, Thomas. Your father is a legend among us translators, and we studied his texts at university." Thomas shook her hand, surprised. "I didn't know his work was academically studied." His method of contextual cultural equivalence revolutionized the approach to translation for Eastern languages in the UK, Felicity explained enthusiastically. "I did my final year project on the application of his principles in literary translation." Richard politely interrupted. "Felicity will be the technical director of the Anthony Sanders Institute. She was already working discreetly on a project to rescue your father's original methodology, so even before this crisis." Thomas looked at the young woman with new interest. "You were trying to implement his method within the company?" Felicity nodded, adjusting her glasses. "A small group of us believed the automated system was losing the essence of your father's work. We had been documenting failures and proposing alternatives, but—" She cast a hesitant glance at Richard. "But I wasn't listening," the CEO completed with honesty. "It took a public crisis for me to see the obvious." Caroline consulted her tablet. "The repercussion of the press conference is extremely positive. The company's shares have already recovered 5% since the announcement. The hashtag Anthony Sanders Legacy is among the trending topics." Richard seemed relieved, but his gaze revealed that his concerns went beyond market fluctuations. "Thomas," he said, "I want you to know that my offer remains open, not just for a position in the company, but for any support that can help you continue your studies. Consider this not as charity or compensation, but as an investment in the legacy your father began." Thomas reflected for a moment. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Miller, but I need time to process all this. My immediate goal is to reorganize my life and, yes, go back to university." "I understand," Richard replied. "When you're ready, the doors will be open." 2 weeks passed since the press conference. Thomas's life had changed dramatically. After numerous invitations, he agreed to participate in a podcast specializing in technology and translation, where he could speak more extensively about his father's work. The interview video went viral, attracting the attention of the academic community. In his small studio apartment in East London, Thomas organized documents for his return to university. He had applied for readmission to the Languages and Literature course, specializing in translation, and eagerly awaited the response. The money saved from deliveries, combined with the payment he received from Tech Global, would give him some financial security for a few months. A knock on the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Opening the door, he found Felicity Oliver, the Tech Global translator, holding a folder and with a shy smile on her face. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she said. "I tried your phone, but it went to voicemail." Thomas, surprised by the unexpected visit, invited her in. "My cell phone broke in the rain that day," he explained. "I haven't been able to replace it yet." Felicity looked around the small apartment. The walls were covered with makeshift shelves, filled with books in various languages, the treasure Thomas had inherited from his father and had never allowed himself to sell, even in times of greatest financial difficulty. "Impressive collection," she commented, examining the titles with genuine interest. "Most were my father's," Thomas explained. "He used to say that each language is a different window into the same world." Felicity smiled, recognizing the phrase. "Quote from the introduction of his article on contextual translation," she said. "I've read it so many times I've memorized parts." Thomas indicated the simple sofa, and they both sat down. "What brings you here, Felicity?" She opened the folder she had brought. "Two matters. First, the Institute is taking shape faster than we expected. Richard is really committed to making this happen. We already have a physical space and approved budget, and we're assembling the initial team. Thomas nodded, genuinely pleased with the news. And the second matter? Felicity took an envelope from the folder and handed it to Thomas. I found this in the company's old archives. It's a letter from your father to you. It was stored with the original project documents. Thomas took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper had yellowed with time, but his name was clearly written in Anthony's unmistakable handwriting. He left this at the company? Apparently, yes. It was in a project documentation box with instructions to be given to you when the time was right. I think that time is now. Thomas stared at the envelope, a whirlwind of emotions crossing his face. Thank you for bringing this, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Felicity seemed to sense the need for privacy. I'll leave you to read in. Peace, she said, getting up. But before I go, I wanted to extend a formal invitation. We would like you to participate in the Institute's advisory committee, even part-time while you study. No one understands your father's vision better than you. Thomas looked up from the envelope, surprised by the invitation. I don't know if I'm qualified for that. I haven't finished my studies. I don't have professional experience in the area. But you have something equally valuable. A personal connection to the method's creator and a natural talent you demonstrated that day at the company, Felicity argued. Besides, you would help us keep the Institute true to Anthony's original vision. Thomas considered the proposal for a moment. Can I think about it? After Felicity left, Thomas remained sitting on the sofa, the yellowed envelope in his hands. The rain had returned to London, gently tapping against the window like an invitation to introspection. Finally, he gathered courage and carefully opened the letter, unfolding the paper that held his father's words, written years earlier. My son, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means that somehow destiny has led you to the work I developed at Tech Global. I don't know how much time has passed, nor the circumstances that led you to discover this letter. I only hope that when this happens, you will have found your own path. Thomas felt his eyes well up, recognizing his father's voice in the written words. When I started developing my cultural translation system, I dreamed of something bigger than a simple technical method. I believed I was creating a way to break down the invisible barriers that separate peoples and cultures. Richard and the other executives saw only a product, a tool to expand markets. I saw a bridge between worlds. The rain intensified outside, as if accompanying the rhythm of the emotions that engulfed Thomas. I don't know what your path in life will be, son. Perhaps you will never be interested in languages or translation. Perhaps you will choose a completely different direction from mine. And that is perfectly fine. What I wish is that, regardless of your choice, you never forget that true communication, whether between languages, people, or cultures, always requires something beyond technique. It requires heart, intuition, respect for the other. Thomas ran his fingers over the paper, as if he could touch his father through the words. If someday you find yourself facing my work, I want you to know, what I created does not belong only to me. It belongs to all who believe in the transformative power of words, when used with wisdom and respect. If you can, help keep this vision alive. Not for me, but for what it represents. The letter ended with a phrase that made Thomas smile through his tears. Always remember, my son, some stories are not translated, they are lived. And you are the most beautiful story I helped write. With eternal love, your father. Thomas carefully folded the letter and put it away. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the city in the rain. London, an immense cultural kaleidoscope where so many stories intertwined daily. His father had dedicated his life to facilitating these encounters between different worlds. Now, unexpectedly, he had the chance to continue that legacy. He picked up his new cell phone, a gift from Richard Miller, delivered after the press conference, and dialed Felicity's number. About the invitation, he said when she answered, I accept to participate in the Institute's advisory committee, but with one condition. I want the project to be truly inclusive, accessible to students and researchers, regardless of financial resources. That's exactly what we expected from you, Felicity replied, and Thomas could hear the smile in her voice. 3 months later, the Anthony Sanders Institute for Intercultural Linguistic Studies was officially inaugurated in a restored historic building in central London. The space, previously abandoned, had been completely renovated, with study rooms, language labs, and a specialized library that would house both traditional volumes and advanced digital resources. At the inauguration ceremony, business leaders, academics, and students mingled in an atmosphere of restrained celebration. Thomas, wearing a suit for the first time in his life, a gift from his mother, who had traveled from the countryside for the event, observed everything with a surreal sense of belonging. Richard Miller, impeccable in his Italian suit, approached with 2 champagne glasses, offering one to Thomas. "Your father would be proud," the businessman said, observing the crowded hall. "In just 3 months, you've transformed a public relations idea into an institution with real purpose." Thomas accepted the glass but did not drink immediately. "I didn't do it alone. Felicity and the team were fundamental. And your financial support, of course." Richard smiled. A different smile from the one he displayed at press conferences. More genuine, less calculated. "You know, in these months working with you on the project, I started to rediscover something I lost a long time ago." "What?" Thomas asked, curious. "Purpose beyond profit," Richard replied, watching the movement of the drink in his glass. "Anthony and I started with similar dreams. At some point, I let numbers on spreadsheets become more important than the real impact of our work." Thomas noticed an unusual vulnerability in the CEO, a glimpse of the man behind the corporate persona. "It's never too late to rediscover what matters," he said. "Indeed," Richard agreed. He raised his glass in a silent toast and moved away to greet other guests. Across the hall, Felicity chatted animatedly with a group of translation students from King's College London. Seeing Thomas, she waved discreetly, inviting him to join the discussion. In recent months, the two had developed a professional partnership that gradually evolved into something more personal, still undefined, but with a potential they both recognized. Thomas crossed the hall, greeting people along the way. Many recognized him from the viral video or subsequent interviews. From hero delivery driver, as the press initially labeled him, he was now seen as a promising young intellectual, a bridge between the academic and corporate worlds. "Everyone, this is Thomas Sanders," Felicity introduced him to the students. "He can tell you firsthand how we applied the method of contextual cultural equivalence in the Huawei tech case." The young people looked at Thomas with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. A student with short hair and a nose piercing spoke up. "I read about your father in college, but I never imagined his method would be so dramatically validated in business practice. It's incredible how his approach proved superior to automated translation." "Actually," Thomas gently corrected, "my father was never against technology itself. What he advocated was a collaboration between automated systems and human sensibility. Technology can process data at impressive speed, but only people can truly understand cultural contexts, emotional nuances, unspoken intentions. Exactly how we are implementing it in Tech Global's new system," Felicity added. "Advanced algorithms working in partnership with specialized human translators, not to replace them." The conversation flowed naturally into technical questions of translation and technology. Thomas, who months earlier was cycling in the rain delivering meals, now discussed complex linguistic concepts with confidence and authority. He had returned to university, and his exceptional grades were already drawing attention from professors. As the evening progressed, the initial formality of the ceremony gave way to a more relaxed atmosphere. During a break, Thomas quietly went up to the building's terrace for a moment of solitude. From there he could see the London skyline, the city that never slept, its lights forming urban constellations. Felicity found him there, contemplating the view. "Everything all right?" she asked, joining him at the edge of the terrace. "Just processing," Thomas replied. "Sometimes it feels like a dream. 4 months ago I was delivering burgers in the rain, worried about paying rent. Now I'm here, helping to run an institute, going back to university. Intimidating. A bit. But mostly," he searched for the right word, "rewarding. As if after drifting for so long I finally found my place." Felicity smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "Your father built the theory, you're putting it into practice. It's a beautiful cycle." "Not just me," Thomas corrected. "This institute isn't about one person. It's about an idea, an approach to communication that goes beyond words. A comfortable silence settled between them. It wasn't necessary to fill that space with words. Both understood, like good translators, that sometimes silence also communicates. "We achieved something rare, you know," Felicity finally said, "transforming a corporate crisis into a project with real social impact. The scholarship programs are already receiving hundreds of applications from students across the country. And from other countries too," Thomas added. "I saw applications from Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Your father's vision expanding beyond the borders he imagined." Thomas smiled, thinking of his father. He felt that in some way Anthony was present there, witnessing how his seed had blossomed. "He always said that well-chosen words can change destinies," he commented. "I never imagined that would apply so literally to my own life." Felicity lightly touched his arm. "Shall we go? The inauguration speech is about to begin." Thomas nodded and followed her back to the main hall. On the way, they passed a newly installed plaque at the library entrance. "Words build bridges where geographies create abysses. Anthony Sanders." At the podium, Richard Miller waited to begin his speech. Seeing Thomas and Felicity enter, he gestured, inviting the young man to join him. "Today I will not speak as Tech Global's CEO," Richard began when everyone was settled, "but as someone who rediscovered, through unexpected circumstances, the value of integrity and a humanist vision in business." His gaze met Thomas's in the front. "Rowan, this institute is born not only as recognition of Anthony Sanders' brilliance, but as a commitment to the values he defended. Authentic communication, cultural respect, valuing the human element in an increasingly automated world." At the end of the event, Thomas took the stage for the final words. He looked at the audience. Academics, business people, students, journalists, all united by a belief in the transformative power of authentic communication. "My father believed that words have the power to build worlds," he said, his voice clear and confident, "that every well-done translation is a bridge between different realities. Today we inaugurate not just an institute, but a collective commitment to that vision." He paused, his eyes scanning the hall before continuing. "In recent weeks, I have received messages from people across the UK, students, professionals, language enthusiasts, inspired by this story. People who, like me, believe in the power of words to transform realities. This institute belongs to all of you. It is a space for us to build, together, new bridges of understanding in a world that so desperately needs authentic communication." Thomas smiled, finally feeling at peace with his past and enthusiastic about the future. "As my father wrote in the letter I recently discovered, some stories are not translated, they are lived. And this story is just beginning." As he descended from the stage to applause, Thomas saw Felicity smiling at him. Beside her, Richard Miller nodded in silent recognition. In that moment, Thomas understood that he had correctly translated his father's legacy, not just in words, but in actions that would continue to reverberate far beyond that night. Dear listeners, we hope Thomas Sanders' journey has touched your hearts and sparked reflections on the power of words and recognition. To continue this exciting experience, we have prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories about family legacies and redemption. Find it by clicking the link on the left. If this narrative about translation, justice, and recognition resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring original stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the beauty of new beginnings. Share in the comments. What moment in Thomas's journey touched you the most? The discovery of his father's work? The confrontation with Richard Miller? Or perhaps the founding of the Institute? We look forward to hearing your impressions and continuing this conversation. Until the next story that, like Anthony Sanders' well-translated words, will build new bridges between us.